Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the third edition of the Conquest Tier List review, where we're going to build a new Conquest Tier List, but we're kind of doing it reviewing my old misconceptions and conceptions about Fire Emblem Fates Conquest Edition. And what's on the menu today is what you see on the bottom row: the servants Jakob and Felicia, as well as Odin Dark, Leo, Effie, and Arthur. Except, psych, we had no time to discuss Leo or Odin. They're gonna get their own episode. And of course, not to forget, wonderful co-host here to bring some more insights, Zoran. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Great to be back once again. And this should be a really interesting batch of units to talk about, so I'm looking forward to it.
For sure. I think there's one unit here that might get like a 5-minute segment where I have to timestamp it or people will miss it. Everything else I'm really looking forward to in regards to the depths. And I thought we could start with the main course of the servants, because they're a pretty big piece of the puzzle overall of the Conquest metagame. Jakob and Felicia. I was thinking we could start with some things that go for both and then go in depth on each of them. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, so we briefly went over them when we were talking about Corrin, some advantages and disadvantages of Jakob and Felicia. I think all you really need to know for that part is that I think Jakob, there were some things he could do that Felicia couldn't, but Felicia was overall considered more reliable for the things you have to do with the servants. But I'm assuming as the game goes on, there's a lot more different paths to either them, different options you want to do. From what I can tell, most Conquest players either really like Jakob, think he's like super broken, or they're like, yeah, he's good, but he's not the best possible unit for any task. And the main standout feature seems to be that they're promoted, but they gain experience, like they're promoted level 1, so really quickly. And that gives them access to level 15 promoted skills a lot faster than most units, which gives them access to like life and death or some rallies or some breaker skills, stuff like that. And that gives them a lot of customization options. I'm not sure how that translates into a tier setting right now. I think initially in my old list, I think I had Jakob at A and Felicia in C. Right now, I expect them to end up a lot closer, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on them, because I think right now I would put them both at least in B and possibly in A, but I'm really not quite sure how well they stack up against the rest of the optimized builds that we've discussed in Conquest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they're both pretty strong units. Just not so much for their combat capabilities later in the game. There are some cool things you can do with that because they have early access to those high-level skills. But I think in practice, the builds you can put together with them for combat purposes are more like novelties than really high-end, super impressive. Yeah, I wouldn't, if we were just rating them on their combat performance, they would obviously be really important for the prologue and for the first several chapters of Conquest, when they have their personal skills essentially give really nice pair-up bonuses to Corrin. They're really helpful. They can also perform pretty well as in actual combat in Chapter 8 against the mages. And they have lots of utility with daggers and staff use for a while. But as the game goes along, some of their inherent weaknesses start to show themselves a little bit more. For example, Jakob and Felicia, yes, they're in promoted classes, but their base stats are really not that much more impressive than other unpromoted units, if at all.
I think they're worse for the most part when I'm playing. Well, it depends on what stats we're talking about. I feel like durability-wise,
it generally does. Yeah. Their bases are not super impressive. Their growths are kind of bad across the board. Like, not horrible, but they're just like subpar in most categories. And of course, they're level 1 units at the start. So if you're expecting to keep them going for the whole game, you're usually going to notice that they're just not as good in the stats department as other characters. And they don't get to promote because they already have their promotions. So they don't get those bonuses. So usually they're going to fall behind. But that said, I think their utility is pretty fantastic. It's nice to have a staff user early on who isn't just a staff user, and can do other things, can be a good para partner, can dual strike or chip with daggers. does have 1/2 range, and you can stack stats to make that work early on. So I think they're actually like, I would probably put them slightly ahead of Kaze, to be honest. They can't quite do. I mean, if you keep them in Butler or Maid, they do get Tonebreaker, which is kind of cool. It's not generally as effective as Kaze at doing what Kaze does, because even though they can use they can wield the Hunter's Knife and everything. Because their stats are going to be subpar, it's just harder to get them to the level where they can not only kill the enemies in one round, but also survive a lot of hits.
Yeah, would you
Whereas
say
with Kaze, it's more like...
Would you say their bulk is comparable to Kaze's in that regard, but then worse in like speed, for example?
Yeah, it'll tend to be along those lines. Kaze has great speed, and depending on the enemy, you may or may not need to patch up his strength. But like usually, you'll just have to fix his defense stat a little bit. With Jakob and Felicia, if you're just trying to have them go around and fight as Maid or Butler, they kind of need a little bit more help in every area. So, like fixing 1 or 2 stats, very doable. Fixing 3 or 4, that takes a lot more effort.
Yeah, because you can only target so many stats with cooking. Tonics you can put on any stat, I guess. Para bonuses tend to not give great stats across the board, just like 1 or 2 stats for a lot, and then maybe a little bit spread out. So I can see why spreading that thin.
Yeah, and you can invest in tonics, across the board if you want, but that is going to be a drain on your economy. Like, you don't want to be putting a strength tonic and a speed tonic and a defense tonic and a resistance tonic on all your combat units all the time if you can avoid it. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's the right thing to do, but that's spending like 600 gold per chapter if you're doing that, and that's not nothing.
Yeah, and I think especially for someone like Felicia, it doesn't even solve the problem if you give her an HP tonic and a defense tonic. I think she would still die to a lot of the things she would want Kaze to do, for example, depending on the enemy type. Like, I'm thinking of like Fuga's Wild Ride, for example, where you fight all the Yami-Ogis and the Sky Knights and stuff. Yeah, I've heard do that.
Yeah,
that seems really dangerous.
Tonebreaker can put in some work there, but in general, if you're looking for like total reliability, it's going to be a little bit tougher to get the servants to that level.
Yeah. Sorry, real quick though, about Tonebreaker. Have you ever? I feel like with that, you also run into the issue where the enemy gets 0 hit on you and you just don't get attacked. Whereas if you don't equip it, it's not as good.
Yeah, that is possible. Luckily, there are some things that can help with that. If you're super over leveled or you've like stacked a whole bunch of speed, you can definitely run into that problem. But for example, Felicia often likes using the Flame Shuriken, which carries a -20 avoid penalty, which sometimes works in her favor because it makes it so instead of making the enemies see like 0 hit, they see like 9.
-20 avoid, jokes on you, I'm into that.
Yeah. I guess optimally you'd get to like 1 of displayed hit only, but like less than sub 15% hit rates on many enemies who are going to target Felicia is pretty good.
Yeah.
And Jakob is less inclined to use that, but he is a little bit slower, and he can use the Steel Shuriken to cut his own avoid as well, not by as much. In fact, because it grants speed, it kind of... Well, so does the Flame Shuriken, but it does marginally reduce his avoid compared to using an Iron Dagger, or I guess you could buy a Steel Dagger. I've never done that, but you could.
Just to nerf him.
Yeah.
Beyond all the other problems with that, it also just seems like a rather expensive solution to a near non-problem, like a near non-problem.
Yeah, it's like it's a thing you can do. It's not really the easiest way to solve the problems that they might solve that way.
No.
But the thing I like most about the servants is their support capabilities. Transitioning into the later part of the game, if you just simply give one of them a Heartsteel and make them into a strategist, it's going to basically nuke their combat capabilities. Even Felicia isn't very good as a strategist. She just doesn't have the stats to go kill things the way that Elise does as a strategist.
She forced to use fire as well? She is, right?
Yeah, neither of them have a tome rank to start with.
That'll do it. That'll nuke it, yeah.
Yeah, Fire's a pretty good tome, but it's at its best when you're already strong stat-wise, and these two aren't. But just having early access to inspiration and rally resistance can be pretty useful. It's one of those things where it depends on your playstyle and how much you're willing to focus on maintaining proper unit positioning and everything. But strategist inspiration plus either Demoiselle or Gentium is a pretty significant durability buff that doesn't, beyond the initial investment of the Heart Seal, like that's 2 to 4 defensive resistance that you can just deploy anywhere to help basically anyone, which is really nice. It can save you some money. If you are like trying to stack up defenses on someone, it can push them even further and maybe help them survive a lot more enemies than they otherwise could. It's a nice level of utility for. I wouldn't say it's a small price. Having one of the first 5 Heart Seals is a pretty significant investment, but it's one of the. There aren't that many ways you can use those first 5 Heart Seals that really change the way the team as a whole performs. And making an early strategist who has inspiration in the mid game is one of the few ways to do that.
Yeah, and this probably also segues nicely into the second incarnation of the servants, because whichever one you don't get early on, you get later on, and that's I found also a very effective way of using, say, Jakob for male Corrin or Felicia for female Corrin, is just having that as a para partner for Corrin, or like you said, the auras, for just the price of a single Heart Seal. You get all that utility for chapters where, like the choke point in nature of, say, the Ninja Cave or the Iago Hans chapter, really work well for those kind of skills. So having that as an option for that, while still retaining whatever you want to do with your early game servant, is also pretty nice.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what the community consensus is now, but I remember for a long time everyone thought basically like Jakob 2 and Felicia 2, the ones who join after chapter 15, so the same gender as your Corrin, are the worst units in the game. And I don't think that's anywhere close to true, because you can, if nothing else, they make perfectly good para partners for Corrin, and that can be quite valuable. And they have easy access to this utility role, like starting at level 13 and going to strategist and picking up inspiration in 2 levels. That's not bad. It's pretty easy to pull that off, and then you just got a high movement heal bot who also has has the aura support, and then I wouldn't say decent chip, but they can help out if they have to.
It's kind of there sometimes. The damage you pull out with them is very embarrassing to look at. I don't even want to do it most of the time.
It's pretty bad.
But sometimes there's an enemy with 1 HP, or you need to set up a dual strike with someone else that's doing decent damage, and it's still like kind of fine. I do agree really that they're not the worst units in the game. I can see how when you deploy them, they're probably going to feel like the worst unit in your army, but they're still like units you would deploy. You wouldn't deploy base level Niles or base level Nyx or something. You'd still use those over them. There's not that many units in this game that just function like that at base, like have that good of a support role.
And in the second half of the campaign, you have generally 12 to 14 deployment slots, and it's maybe you're using like 6 to 8 of those for combat purposes, whether they're like pair up bots for your main combat units or actual combat units themselves. And then generally you don't need 4 to 6 more people who are also competent at combat. You just want to fill that out with various utility functions, and having an aura bot is a perfectly valid choice there.
Yeah,
and it's going to be more helpful usually than having like your 8th best combat unit on the field.
Yeah, I think the only argument beyond that is like maybe you're deploying kids, which can take up some space, but those are still potentially either combat or support units, and they'd still probably be better than some of the kids would be at support. So again, do you want to add a kid for combat if they're the 9th best? Not that much of an added value.
Like if you want to, sure, you can make it work.
Yeah.
But is it really the most important thing to be deploying? Yeah, not really.
Yeah. The question we're asking most of the time here is not can it work, or is it impossible to make it work? Because almost anything can work. The question is usually like how much trouble would it be to make this work? And for these two, compared to how much you get out of it, how much trouble you have to go to. And with these two, I feel like the trouble with even the second version of the versions is just like use one of the Heart Seals that you might not be using anyway. Seems like very mild.
Mm-hmm.
On a side note, I'm not quite sure how to tackle Jakob 1 and 2 and Felicia 1 and 2, like both versions existing, because the tier list maker only has one portrait for each of them. I think I just ended up taking up the average in the end. Some people probably would prefer if I tiered them based on their best incarnation. I don't have a great answer to that. I was initially just thinking basically doing the latter actually, but I'm curious to think where they both fall. If you did them separately, and then maybe we can take the average. You said like the ones sound like you want ahead of Kaze, for example, right?
Yeah, I think so for sure. The twos, as we get deeper in this list, we're going to talk about some more units who are like more or less purely support oriented. In fact, we have, I think, a pretty important candidate for that kind of role on today's schedule. And I don't think that by itself would really take you to A tier. But when you factor in how good they are at their support role, I would still consider them like reasonable B tier units as their second joining incarnations.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think I'm more positive about them than a lot of people are. But should we get into a few more specifics about how Jakob works?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Paladin Jakob specifically, but everything else you have to say about him is fine too, of course. I used Paladin Jakob a lot in my last Lunatic playthrough that I did. I was really happy with his performance, but I can also see, while we're talking about it, where he falls short, where someone like Silas wouldn't, for example. So that might be a good starting point.
Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing to get out of the way is before the Branch of Fate, Jakob is better than Felicia, and that's almost entirely down to the fact that he can survive like one more hit than she can, which just lets female Corrin and Jakob advance through the two maps they have together a little bit faster than male Corrin and Felicia can. But I don't care that much about that, because you can play the prologue with female Corrin and then change genders at the Branch of Fate if you want. And yeah, that'll deny Felicia 1 some experience that she could have gotten in those early chapters, but it's not that important. She can still do most of the things she wants to do at level 1 instead of level 3 or level 4 or whatever.
That would put her further away from level 15 shenanigans though, right?
It would, but because of the way the experience scales, it's not as though you actually get a significant head start getting to level 15 in particular. That's just going to take until roughly chapter 12 or 13 anyway, no matter where you're starting from.
Yeah, that is around when I think we got some level 15 skill on our Jakob. I think we were Wyvern Jakob at that point, so that sounds about right.
Yeah. So what Jakob can do early on, and I think most famously, is he can take the first Heart Seal from the level 1 staff store and Silas's Bronze Lance and actually function as a Paladin or a Great Knight, at least after Silas joins, in Chapter 7. And what's nice about that is Jakob has, and like at base, if you switch him into the Cavalier tree, Jakob has roughly equivalent combat capabilities to Vow of Friendship Silas. So he can do a lot of what Silas can without having to worry about managing Corrin's HP. So that's like keeping Corrin's HP low but not getting them killed is a bit of a challenge for Silas that doesn't really exist for Paladin or Great Knight Jakob. And with Paladin Jakob, you can also get 1 extra point of movement. He has 8 move instead of Silas's 7. He also gives a plus movement pair-up bonus, whereas an unpromoted Cavalier does not. And that's a perfectly legitimate strategy to go that direction. It works fine. Jakob as a Paladin or Great Knight can hit the same kill benchmarks that Silas can, like Silas taking the boss kill, one-rounding the Kilma in Chapter 8. Jakob can do that too. All the kinds of movement tricks you'd want to do with your Cavalier in those early chapters, if you're trying to go fast, Jakob can help you do that just as well. So he's in the early game, he's like a perfectly adequate replacement for Silas. Even starts with the same lance rank, so it's not like Silas already has javelin access and Jakob doesn't or anything like that. and that works fine. He also becomes, in some ways, a better para partner for Corrin. You do kind of like the fact that Butler gives 3 speed naturally in para, whereas Paladin or Great Knight won't. But Paladin gives +2 defense, Great Knight gives 4, and that stacks with Jakob's personal skill, so he can give Corrin 5 or 7 extra physical defense by pairing up, which is really impressive, especially for some Corrin builds that might appreciate that extra survivability a lot. Like if you go Ninja early,
Oh yeah.
obviously if you're giving the first heart seal to Jakob, then you're delaying Corrin's access to Ninja until after you beat Haitaka. But yeah, giving a Ninja +7 defense and a little bit of extra attack and movement early on is really nice.
Yeah, I can imagine. I remember like using Gunter on ninjas for like the same effect. It seems really good.
Mm-hmm. So, on that, looking purely at that part of the game, you think Jakob is pretty good. I would consider it not worth the investment because Silas can do all that stuff too, and the few marginal benefits that you get, like the extra movement on Jakob as a paladin or the movement parrot bonus, it turns out they don't actually help you do anything in an LTC kind of environment. And if you're not going for LTC, the maps, the early maps before Chapter 10 are really so structured that you're not going to get that much benefit out of it, even if you're like approaching that a little bit more casually.
Yeah, I have like an example of that experience. We were playing Fort Dragonfall, I think that's Chapter 9, with Paladin Jakob, and the idea that Gwimpage had was you pair Niles to him so you have an extra point of movement, and that way, I think the idea is that Jakob can dive into the middle of the map, kill the Enfeeble priestess in the middle to get rid of her without having to drain the staff all the way or doing like AI shenanigans, and then Jakob can just kill everything. That was the episode that took the longest to record and do because it kept failing because Jakob kept getting like either Jakob would die to seal defense and getting hit a lot, or Azora would die because reinforcements would spawn and go for her. So even though it was a really cool looking strategy, I did get the feeling that it was more just about showing off what Jakob can do, but it didn't really feel like a reliable strategy that really increases your options in a significant way. It didn't really feel reliable enough to be so significant. There were a lot of moments where the Paladin Jakob really shone, and when he got Wyvern later, it was really good. But that particular chapter, I think, is a good example of what you just talked about.
Yeah, and I think there's also some pretty significant opportunity cost in that you're giving up your 6 movement dagger unit with staff access. And those things are replaceable. You don't really need the daggers to kill the enemies. You don't need the debuffs. And if you don't reclass Elise, then you have her as your dedicated staff bot. But I just think it's a lot nicer to have a butler around and be able to do some things with that. Like in Chapter 8, Jakob is pretty well equipped to fight all the dark mages. I believe he just needs Corrin support and maybe strength and speed tonics. Might not even need the speed to one round the
Dark mages.
The dark mages on that map.
Yeah, I had Felicia. I think her attack is slightly lower, and she was able to reach it with a strength tonic and Corrin pair for me. And my Corrin was like not even good, so I'm assuming it's very easy to reach for Jakob.
Yeah, I know Felicia can't do it at base. I think she's 1 point short, if I remember correctly. But if she gains strength at any point, or if somehow she's already gotten a C rank in daggers, then she can do it too.
You do need a C support, right, for the Corrin's personal to activate.
Yeah, you need supportive. I guess you could potentially use Arthur's pair up, but that's probably a lot less good.
How much does Arthur give? 4?
Because 4 strength.
Yeah. And
any Corrin in Nor Prince or Princess will give 2+2 with supportive.
That works. Yeah, I found it very useful. I mean, I think the butler is so good, you don't want to do this. It's not a great argument for putting Jakob or Felicia lower on the list, because either way, it's their utility doing work. It's probably a good argument against the Heart Seal, though. My main argument against it would be that there is some units that probably gain more from the Heart Seal, which I guess is what you're applying. Like, I'm thinking Elise especially really benefits from the first one.
Yeah. like I wouldn't say, I would say, don't get me wrong, making Jacob is a paladin or great knight is an effective strategy. It works well. I just think as you understand more about the game and you get used to manipulating all the mechanics, you realize, oh, Silas can do this too, and I don't have to spend a heart seal for it, so I can use that for other fun things I might want to do in my run.
Yeah. So if you
Which
take
might still involve Jacob.
Yeah, true. It might just be the sum of all the parts you have is better when you don't heart seal Jacob, because you get the benefit of whatever heart seal benefit you get, which could be at least Mozu, whatever. Plus you get the paladin utility almost perfectly replicated by Silas, and you get the support from whatever Jacob can do as a butler. It seems like a better sum than heart sealing him and losing the two other things.
But I think the most notable thing about both Jacob and Felicia is what they can do with Corrin marriage, which is really their only great source of high-end classes and therefore high-end skills early on. Jacob's actually better positioned than Felicia for this because he does theoretically have 3 different people he can marry besides Corrin to get Wyvern access. All of them are at least a little bit awkward because if he's going to marry Elise, he gets Wyvern from her because of parallel, or because they have matching base classes, so he gets her alternate class instead. The only realistic way I think you're building that support on schedule is by making Elise a Wyvern rider, and she doesn't very much appreciate Jacob's pair-up bonuses while she's in Wyvern. I guess he kind of likes having Wyvern pair-up bonuses himself, but I don't love it. I think there's better things, or better partners to use with Elise.
Yeah, for sure. It benefits Jacob, but not necessarily Elise.
Yeah. And then he can marry Camilla or Baruka, but because they join in Chapter 10, he's not going to get that support done until the mid-game. And that's kind of beyond his window where he has access to those high-level Wyvern Lord or Malignite skills is very notable.
Yeah, at that point you have so many people who can do that. Yeah,
and he doesn't really want to be fishing for trample in the middle of Chapter 17, having not really trained his axe rank or anything. That can be awkward. I guess I should mention along that line, Great Knight Jacob is better than Paladin Jacob because it's for the things he does in the early game. It's easier for him to reach kill benchmarks with the higher strength of Great Knight than with the higher speed of Paladin. Even though Paladin gets Defender relatively quickly, it still works out so that between axe access and the higher strength, it's more consistent with Great Knight Jacob. And I think Great Knight Jacob's pair bonuses on a frailer kind of Corrin build are more notable too. Instead of wasting 2 points in res, you're giving 2 extra points in defense.
I can see that. You're giving up movement for it, for sure, but if you kill things faster, that might also make you more mobile.
Yeah. So, what do you do with Corrin marriage then? I think there's maybe 3 interesting ideas for that. One is along the same line as marrying Elise or Camilla or Baruka, going for Wyvern Lord or Malignite. And I think the core idea behind that is you just stack a whole bunch of great damage skills and you get into a flying class where you can deploy those effectively. So, for example, you could make Jacob a Paladin first and pick up Elbow Room, Shelter, Defender, work on the marriage with Corrin, get into Malignite and grab Strength +2 and eventually Trample at level 15.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we
So
did.
at that point, you've got a flying unit with +11 damage, at least physically, and Shelter utility, which is pretty cool. Except when you look at where Jacob's stats end up with that kind of thing, yes, he'll have really strong individual attacks because of that damage stack. But if he's in Malignite at like level 15, his going between level 15 and level 20, his speed is about Baruka tier. Like if you raised Baruka to the same level and promoted her as well, she would actually be slightly faster than him, or about the same. That's not a great place to be for a unit that you've invested 2 seals in.
Core marriage.
One of those involving Corrin's marriage.
Yeah, that's a lot. I had the same problem. Like individual attacks were very good. He was like one-shotting things like ninjas. I forgot if he one-shotting master ninjas, but the damage tag was very impressive. But only when he doubled did it really come together, which is not very often.
Yeah, I think you can. I think if he's like level 20, I don't know, 2-ish at Ninja Cave, he can probably reach the one-shot benchmarks without too much trouble with something like a forged hand axe, and plus 11 damage. Like that's fairly impressive. But then again, you're fighting ninjas with a hand axe, which is also not great, just in terms of reliability. And yeah, beyond ninjas are basically made of glass. You can hit those one-shot benchmarks a lot more easily than most other units. And for other general purpose combat, you really do want to be doubling.
Yeah,
so
particularly
really
like chapter 20 plus, the kill thresholds are so high, even when you're doubling already, it feels like.
Yeah. So you really do need to work on like improving Jakob's speed somehow. His magic and Malignite, if you stick with that, is not great. It's like workable because he has so many damage boosting skills. So you can make things happen with fire, thunder, horse spirit, potentially the bolt axe, that kind of stuff. But that's still going to be a lot worse than someone like Spirit Dusted Camilla, or a trained Wyvern Elise, or Malignite Corrin. So I just think it's kind of questionable to dump that many resources into someone who is really not that impressive in combat past, I don't know, like at best chapter 17. The point in the game where Jakob really shines when you do that is around chapter 12, 13, 14, when maybe he's getting trample and he's starting to really outclass the enemies there. But the thing is, those unpromoted enemies are not that hard to kill with anyone else. I think we talked last time about how Elise can hit one run benchmarks off of her base strength in chapter 13 with the right pair of partners and other boosts. So maybe Jakob doesn't require so much help with strength, but that's like his peak is a relatively easy part of the game where in a few chapters he'll get outclassed, whereas other people who might be taking those same kills in that part of the game and doing largely the same tasks actually have a lot more room to grow. So I think that's another strategy that it works well. You can do it. I think it's one of the reasons why I would consider Jakob to be A tier material on this tier list, but I don't think it's as good as some of your other options.
Mm-hmm.
So the 2 other tracks I think are kind of notable are using the samurai talent and going for life and death shenanigans, which sounds better on paper than it really is, because that's really not that much more damage than just getting trample, and it's a lot riskier. You really do have to be hitting one-shot thresholds to make that kind of thing work, and I don't think Jakob is usually going to hold up doing that for a long time. I think it's more viable in Birthright, where the enemy progression is a lot more stagnant, a lot deeper in the game. Whereas in Conquest, you're starting to see much scarier enemies in chapter 18, 19, 20.
Yeah, for sure. And with that build, if you don't hit your thresholds, you're just a player phase glass cannon. You can't really do a whole lot with that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a lot of other units at that point would probably be able to at least fight on enemy phase for more than one enemy. So that feels like, yeah, like you said, a very risky build.
And the last one, I think, is going for Replicate with either, I guess you could use Apothecary Talent, but probably Ninja. And that's one of those things where, again, I think it sounds better on sounds better than it really is. The value proposition here is you get him into Mechanist relatively early, you get Replicate. Now, for the rest of the game, you've got an extra free unit to use. The thing is, it's kind of a bad free unit. Ninja and Mechanists are classes that rely on you having good stats to be good, and they don't, beyond getting Shuriken Fair at level 15 in Ninja, they don't really help your combat performance by themselves. They don't give you useful skills to improve your stats. So you're trying to build a unit with relatively bad bases and relatively bad growths into, I guess, a pair of kind of mediocre, dagger wielders. I just think there's a lot. There are much better candidates for doing that. You don't really need two of them. Replicate's not really doing that much for you. One of the benefits of it is you can pass down Replicate to the kids.
That was the sales pitch I got.
Yeah, you're marrying Jacob, so you can pass down Replicate to both Kana and Dwyer. If you do that early, then I guess you've got 3 extra units. Both Kana and Dwyer are going to be pretty bad.
They were awful. I hated it. I was like, dude, I get 8 units for the price of basically 1, and they were all terrible.
Yeah. Like, Kana's not going to appreciate Jacob's genes at all. Getting Troubadour does basically nothing for him. And Dwyer starts in Troubadour, so he doesn't have any weapon ranks. Doesn't inherit Ninja, so he gets Troubadour, Cavalier, and Nor Prince, which is a terrible class set to work with. His stats will probably be better than Kana's if you train him, but starting in Troob is just not a great place to begin. So what you get out of it, I guess, is you've got Jacob and his copy running around as maybe Replicate Shuriken Fair Master Ninjas, and you've got a pair of kids and their duplicates, who all 4 of which are pretty bad. And I just don't really see what it's doing for you. You can argue that, I guess maybe the best thing to do with it actually would be to get Replicate and then go into Strategist and just be a better staff bot.
And get the auras maybe. I was
dual auras.
I could tell you what I got out of it.
Be able to rally from behind the lines.
I didn't have a whole lot of royals on that team on that playthrough that I did it with. I was using like Odin and a bunch of other people who, Odin says he has royal blood, but he doesn't really. And it turns out that a replicating Kana gets me to Dragon Veins a lot faster. And that's all they can do is proc Dragon Veins. That's their main utility.
All right.
Some shelter shenanigans. That's it.
That is something. For that kind of thing, I would love if they could fly, but sadly they don't have any flying classes in this particular setup.
Yeah, the Jacob was pretty good, I will say, but I don't remember what work went into it that made that work. But the Korin that started as Ninja was much better than all that combined.
Yeah, like with Jacob, certainly you can go, Elbow Room Defender, Shuriken Fair, and make something competent out of that. Just again, I think there's people who are just better at that job anyway. I don't see why you'd be inclined to make, invest Korin's marriage in that. You can, it's kind of fun, but I just think there's a lot more you can achieve with that.
Yeah, I think notable and funny are the 2 best words to describe that build.
Yeah. So Felicia, on the other hand, I think has a different kind of funny build, which is she's basically the only viable dodge tank in the whole game.
What?
Because she gets, with Korin marriage, she can get 5 of the 6 weapon breaker skills. She has, like, as a mage, she gets Tonebreaker if you raise her to level 15. Since she has the mercenary class set, which promotes both to hero and bow knight, she can get both Axe Breaker and Shuriken Breaker. With Korin marriage, taking either Dragon talent, so Wyvern, for Swordbreaker, or the Oni Savage talent for Lancebreaker, she can get one of those 2, and then she can also eventually befriend Flora for Dark Mage access to get Tonebreaker, or Bowbreaker rather, from Sorcerer. I don't think you should go for all of those, but there are some pretty cool things you can do with that kind of class progression, given what she has. For example, if you take the Wyvern talent, you probably don't want to wait till level 15 and get Tonebreaker, but you can rush marriage with Felicia pretty quickly, in time for chapter 10 even. Make her a Wyvern Lord for chapter 10, train up to level 15, get Swordbreaker, and just Swordbreaker, so she'll rally defense and Swordbreaker. Then switch over using one of the Heart Seals to either Hero or Bow Knight, get one of those breaker skills. I kind of like Hero because I think it's funny to also get Soul and Stronger Post along the way. You get Stronger Post either way. So if you go through Hero, you can stack Axebreaker with Swordbreaker, and then you can use another partner seal, go to Malignite, pick up Trample. And now you've got something like Elbow Room, Trample, Soul, Swordbreaker, Axebreaker, Felicia, which is pretty cool. There's some fun gimmicks you can pull off with that kind of thing. Is it the best possible combat unit? No. Is it a very unique thing that you don't get from anyone else? Yes.
It does sound really fun to try, actually. I was worried when you were mentioning all the breakers that she wouldn't have any skill slots to like fix her damage output, but then she still had Elbow Room and Trample.
Yeah, going for all 5 breakers is kind of a fool's errand because you can dodge stuff, but you can't really hit damage them back. But yeah, you can definitely get some help with her damage with her Mercenary and potentially Wyvern skills. I think that's cool. For my money, I think it's better than what Jakob can do if he does something similar with Malignite. Felicia having more speed and better magic and the dodge tanking capability is, I think, going to be more useful to more players than just having Jakob with plus 11 damage and not much else to speak of.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
So I think that's the coolest thing Felicia can do. Again, just like I said before, I think the best thing either of them can really do, even whether they're Servant 1 or Servant 2, is just be a strategist. Like do things in the early game, be useful, fight mages with your daggers and everything, and just become a strategist and help out for the rest of the game.
Yeah, just do things that don't require stats, basically, right?
Yeah, they're perfect at that. They have separate utility with their personal skills if you need to boost Corrin's stats. They have the auras, they have rallies, they have staff access. They might be, frankly, they might be the only person in the whole army who gets to B rank and stays to use in trap. So that's kind of notable unless you capture someone.
Yeah, and I mean, they can be a good piece of the puzzle for your endgame clear then, right? Because they have to move to use rescue or entrap, whatever you need.
Yeah. So I think that's worthwhile. And I think generally they're, like, all things considered, they're a bit better than Kaze. My feeling right now is because I think the most if you're going along the path that I recommend, I think Jakob is notably better than Felicia at doing some of the combat tasks in the very first few chapters of Conquest. So I would give him the edge. Although I think, as I said last time, Felicia is slightly better for some turn count oriented playthroughs where you might need her extra speed bonus at C rank and her better attack bonus with her personal skill early on. And I do think on the extreme end, when you're really investing in them, I like using Felicia better than Jakob. But for a kind of middle path that I think makes sense in terms of resource allocation, I do think Jacob's a little bit better.
Yeah, sounds reasonable to me. But they are basically the same, right? They shouldn't be apart by someone like Kaze. That doesn't make sense.
I don't think there's that much significantly separating them.
Yeah.
I might jam a few units between them just on kind of vibes, but it's not like there's a huge gap between what Jakob can do and what Felicia can do in general.
Seems fair. All right. Just a kind of in-depth analysis I want to start with. Are we finished with the servants, by the way? Is that all they can do, or does that matter? Was that all you wanted to say on them?
I think so. That's all I can think of right now.
That's
Yeah.
good. Don't get me wrong; it was still a lot. I was just curious if there was anything left. But I mean, I'm sure it'll come up at some point if there's like something important we forgot. At the time of recording, by the way, I haven't uploaded any of these yet. So any of your very constructive feedback in the comments, I have not been able to see or incorporate yet. But I'm sure that'll come soon as I get the first episode online. I was thinking we've been going for about 45 minutes. Maybe we do like a quick break between the units by having discussing a unit that's not going to take a whole lot of time in Arthur, and then we can dive into maybe one or two of these more, depending on the best way to segment this.
Okay.
So I think that Arthur is a unit that's usually just used for the parrot bonuses. We discussed them a little bit earlier, where it just gives someone 4 strength and I think some speed as well. So basically one of the best offensive.
4 and 2 as a fighter.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that usually leads to you just not training Arthur a whole lot. I think he's one of the funniest units to train. I think his quotes are hilarious. Like, just based on unit feel alone, I would always use this unit. But at the same time, it's really hard to justify doing that because he's so much better at making someone else good at combat, like hitting 1-round thresholds for someone like Elise in Wyvern, for example, or really anyone that needs help reaching strength and or speed thresholds. Whereas using him on his own, he doesn't have access to his own parrot bonus, and it's kind of hard to make him do things compared to some other early game units like Silas or maybe Corrin or maybe even a Heartsealed Jacob. So I feel like he's one of the harder units to train. You can still make him work, and he has like, I feel like he has some decent class options. I feel like anyone who has hero should be like looked at the very least. But the one playthrough I used Arthur full time, I never felt like, oh, this sure is a unit I'm glad I used. And I don't know, he just feels kind of underwhelming in combat. And I think he really asks the question, what do we want to assume when we're tiering a unit the way they're being used? Because I think if you just tier Arthur based on what he does for another unit, it's just in parrot bonuses. It's like, you should always use him like the whole way through. But if you tier him based on how you use him in combat, he'd almost have to be ranked lower because it doesn't add a whole lot from what I see. Maybe all this is wrong. That this is just my perspective right now. So I'm curious what you think on what the tiering philosophy behind that should be. But also just, of course, Arthur as a unit in general.
Yeah, I think you basically nailed it as far as what using Arthur is like. He's definitely really fun, and I think that there are some like kind of neat things you can do with him because he's an early joining first gen guy with like Niall's friendship early and being able to marry 2 different Wyvern riders and all that stuff. But it feels so bad to not have another fighter on the team. On the relay run we did, where it was Balk, right? Balk made Arthur actually a great knight early.
Oh yeah, I remember that promotion. And he's both
but just making him a cavalier at the beginning it's so miserable. And you might look at that option and think, oh great, yeah, you can get elbow room, you can use more accurate weapons, get shelter in a few levels, and he has more mobility and everything. But God, not having access to any fighter parrot bonuses is such a drag. The fact that he can't support himself and give himself fighter bonuses is a real drag for him, because he would love to have more strength and more speed, and nobody else can really give that to him. It's just not great. But at the same time, I think what he achieves for you when you deploy him is so notable that I consider him a good unit anyway. Arthur's actually the only fighter you can get until Charlotte joins in Chapter 13, except for a couple of paralogs where you can capture a fighter or berserker. But otherwise, if you're going through the early part of the game, there are no enemy fighters at all. So you can't really replace what he does, not even with generics. And that makes him pretty noteworthy as a support unit for all different kinds of characters. Effie loves having a strength bonus to hit her one-shot thresholds. You mentioned Elise as a Wyvern rider. She really likes having his strength and speed bonuses to hit those kill benchmarks. Other people appreciate that too, like Camilla. Even Kaze sometimes if he doesn't need help with bulk. Corrin likes it. Mozu even, although I don't think he's really best used on Mozu. Baruka loves being paired with Arthur. It's just like so many people really want his help, and he's the only one who can provide it for at least a little while. Because he's around from basically the beginning, he gets to build support ranks, which makes him even better at helping his teammates. Although he only gives skill at C rank support, he gives strength at both B and A rank. So it's 2 strength and 1 skill to anyone he pairs with if they're at A rank support with each other. That's very nice. It's not quite as much strength as Keaton or Charlotte can give at S rank, but you don't need to marry Arthur to get maximum benefit from his parrot bonuses. Whereas I believe those two both give 2 strength at S rank. So they give 1 strength before you marry them and then 3 after. I'm pretty sure that's right. Whereas Arthur gives his maximum strength at A rank. Oh yeah, Niles loves working with him too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So yeah, the question here is really like, how much do you value being a great pair-up bot? And I wouldn't say it feels great to use a unit only in that way, but objectively, it's very, very important. So among the first gen units, I wouldn't put Arthur at the same level as Kaze necessarily. I think he's behind him, so I might say top of B tier, but he really is very important and very useful. And then eventually, if you do want to do some reclassing with him, once you have replacements for fighter pair-up bonuses, when you get Keaton or you get Charlotte or you get a generic Berserker or something, he can do that stuff. He's not very good at it because his personal skill is awful for him. It makes him vulnerable to crits basically permanently unless he has Percy nearby. And although his stats are kind of hilariously min-maxed in that he totally dumps luck and his other growths are pretty good. But his speed base is not that impressive. His strength base is like fine, but it's not spectacular. So if you're trying to make him into a combat unit for the long term, there's a lot that has to go into that. And it's another one of those things. It can work. I honestly think it might be better than like Wyvern Jacob, actually, if you really want to go.
Is the rest of this is going to be like comparing things to Wyvern Jacob just to prove the point?
Well, just considering like what Arthur can get out of multiple reclasses compared to what Jacob can, it's like, yeah, I actually do think Arthur is kind of more impressive along that route. But regardless, I don't think it's a good idea. He's really great just sticking with fighter and then Berserker. It's a real shame that Hero's not very good on him because he gets a unique outfit and it fits him personality-wise and everything.
I mean, don't you want to be get Soul at least and then go to Berserker or something?
Not really. You just don't get good opportunities to exploit Soul, even if you're as a Berserker. There are some places where you can theoretically make it happen, but since so much of the late game combat relies on you having the ability to counterattack, especially at 2 range, the only way you can do that with Soul is with a Tomahawk, which I would not recommend.
Tomahawk is 2 range only in this game, right?
It is 2 range only.
Yeah.
Yes. There are places where you can still make that work, but it's finicky.
It's so fitting the way you phrased that. Like, you don't have many opportunities to explore Soul, because I did use Arthur for that one playthrough and I got Soul and then went Berserker, I think. I don't remember exactly what Arthur's stats were like. I want to say it was mostly HP and strength and then enough speed to where you can make him double with a lot of effort. And yeah, I had Soul, but I never really procced it or never really got use out of it for some reason. And that might be why.
I mean, especially because it's misfortunate, right?
His skill?
What's the name of the skill? I believe so.
Everyone knows what it is.
Makes him so vulnerable. Yeah, it makes him so vulnerable to crits that he almost always wants to be holding a bronze axe if at all possible. And that means no Soul either.
Oh, that might be another reason why. Not just for the crits, but also just accuracy is also just so nice. If you can kill with bronze, why would you use anything else, right?
Very true. Yeah. And Arthur does have accuracy problems in the beginning of the game, which is when you're most likely to actually use him in combat and not purely for pair up. The Bronze Axe mostly solves that, but not entirely. But he does have a really good skill growth, which helps a lot. Having terrible luck is kind of a drag, though, even just for accuracy purposes. So yeah, I think it kind of sucks to make Arthur anything other than what he starts out as. And on some level, that makes him a little disappointing, but he's so great at being a parabot that I would still call him like top of B tier.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. I mean, in the end, almost every criterion we use for this is arbitrary, especially when you factor in that thing where, like, in the early game, you don't have a choice on who to deploy, so no matter what, Arthur's going to be on the field anyway, so there's no opportunity cost, but there's also no choices by the player being made on whether you're going to use Arthur or not. Like, you're not going to put Arthur in the corner of the map doing nothing, you're going to pair him up to someone. But then when you do pair him up to someone, he adds, like, if you make someone double that didn't double before, he's making do 8 more damage. I can't just ignore that, right? So...
yeah, it's really powerful.
It's insane. All right, well, at least, even if we don't end up with top of B tier, this is where it'll be at the very least. Okay. Yeah. Anything else on Arthur?
Do you want to do Effie?
Yes, I was about to suggest that, because
no, I think...
yeah, these two deserve an episode of their own, really, and Effie might not take as long. I think she's more interesting than Arthur, though. Sorry, go ahead.
I'd be game to go another 50 minutes or whatever, but yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation to go on with Leo and Odin. So if we want to reserve some time for that, then
I agree. I would definitely be game for another 40 minutes of Odin Dark. I would always be, but I also actually have somewhere to go after this. So Effie it is.
Fair enough.
Effie it is.
Okay.
I started streaming a Conquest Screw Your Opponent Over draft result. Basically, I'm doing a playthrough with a team that someone else assigned to me. Like, I didn't get any choice on what units to pick, and one of the only early game units I have is Effie. So I'm going to get a lot of Effie experience over the course of the first couple games, but I've already used Effie a fair bit. I don't know if I've ever been able to finish a playthrough with Effie doing a whole lot of work, because I think she peaks in the early game, and after that it's kind of hard for her to do some of the things that she was known for at that point. Obviously, she's an early game tank. You can compensate for mobility fairly easily with pair up, get her to places, and then the fact she doesn't double doesn't hurt as much, because very few people are one-running anyway, and Effie has so much strength that she can two-shot or even one-shot people. There's a funny phrase that I can't get out of my head where there's like a mage somewhere and Effie can just run up and one-shot him and ask, like, what mage are you talking about? Something about that was very amusing to me, so it's going to be running. Yeah, what exactly? Because she has weapon triangle over them as well. It's so silly how strong she is over them. And
yeah, it's a lot nicer having her kill mages on player phase early on than like Odin or Arthur or even Niles.
Yeah, people take counterattacks and that sucks. Like, just kill the mage, so there's no more mage. And she can do that to some other enemies as well. Like, I was looking at my chapter 10 save, and mine is able with I think she needs a Korin pair up or a dual strike to just one-shot the ninjas in turn 1 in chapter 10. It's ridiculous the things she can do and reach. Puissance is just such a funny personal skill. Like, how easy it is to activate with sometimes just a pair up or a strength tonic and just start bulldozing people. I do notice that when she's not supported by like an aura or a pair up or something, that there is enough damage in the early game where she can get overwhelmed and die, so it's not like she's invincible like, I don't know, Oswin in the Blazing Blade, but she's definitely able to tank if you want her to make her tank, and that's really helpful. And like I said, she can kill mages, so that's like one of the main weaknesses of these kind of tanky units gone. As the game goes on, I feel like there's 2 main ways you could take Effie. One of them was just stay in the armored class, either go Great Knight or General or something. Wary Fighter does not seem that good. That's the route I went with the first time. I don't think I got a whole lot of value out of it. The other route would be like Great Knight to get a bit of extra move, and that never felt impressive to me either. I don't remember exactly why. I don't think Luna is very good either anyway, but it just didn't feel like it got a whole lot done. That was before I was optimizing things, so you could probably still make her one-shot things in these classes, but it seemed fine. The other route is Friendship Mozu, and then go Archer, Sniper, Kinshi Knight, whatever you feel like doing. I kind of have been a Kinshi Knight hater for Fates. I feel like the class is not as good as a lot of people say it is, because killing flyers is not the main problem usually for me. Like, they're weak to bows. There's a ton of weight, or like weak to the Hunter's Knife, weak to a ton of stuff. There's like one chapter that has a bunch of flyers, and that's the chapter you can potentially skip. And if not, there's other ways to fight it than like deploying a bazillion Kinshi Knights. In Revelation, I think it's very nice. But generally, I feel like Kinshi Knight has not done as much for me as I thought it would based on other people's comments. Sniper, played around with a little bit. It's very strong, but also it's a sniper. Like, you can only do so much with a unit that can't do it one range. And I think it kind of sucks to give up Effie's durability for a bunch of power with a bow. It didn't feel like the right thing to me. She sure was doing a lot of damage, but it didn't feel like the best the unit could possibly be, if that makes sense. So, in summary, none of the builds seem very great for Effie in the long term. But I do feel like she's pretty good. I don't know if I would put her in A tier based on my experiences with her, but I have confidence that this is a unit you can make do a lot of stuff just because of how good Puissance is in her strength stat. So I'm curious what the more experienced opinion is on Effie.
I basically agree with all the points you made, actually. She's definitely the kind of unit who peaks in the early game because she hits those one-shot kill thresholds early on that are significantly harder to maintain as you go through and we start promoting. In fact, if Vow of Friendship weren't a thing, I'd probably call her the second best combat unit in the early chapters. But it is, so Silas kind of usurps a lot of the things that Effie might be doing otherwise. She's still very valuable there, though. Like in Chapter 9, there's plenty of choke points where it's really helpful to jam her in a hole. And
so you're saying Khorne is better than her as well, then, at that point?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Khorne's still number one. But she's very effective in those early chapters. You can tell that, like, in Chapter 7, you're very obviously meant to just plug her in one of those one-tile choke points to stop the Faceless from coming at you. She does perfectly well at that. I do think, as far as promotions go, sticking with the Knight tree, Great Knight is far, far better than General. For basically all the usual reasons. Also, Wary Fighter is basically useless on her. The only thing it does for you that's kind of positive is it prevents you from getting doubled. Effie can get enough speed to avoid that, and in fact, what you generally be trying to do is give her enough speed to double things, which is something you can do because this is Fire Emblem Fates. So even if she has like 20, you can get her like 35 if you want to. And Great Knight Effie does fine. She's pretty strong. You can give her Berserker pair up, probably Arthur, and just use her massive strength and puissance and everything to start, kill things on player phase and to a degree on enemy phase. She is, I think I mentioned with Silas that he's like one of the only like decent users of the Brave Lance if you want to go that route with like Falcon Knight. Great Knight Effie can take that up too. It's just you're going to be a lot more limited because you're a grounded unit with 7 movement. There's a couple marginal things you can do, like if you have Effie marry Silas and promote to Great Knight, then she picks up the Cavalier skills for free, which is kind of nice.
I've seen that trick with Arthur. It's kind of funny.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a thing. It marginally improves her, but I don't think by enough to really make that notable. And then because unfortunately her friendship sets are really limited, but she does have a pretty good one in Archer from Mozu. I think the one thing I would contest in what you said is about like how much of a struggle it's going to be to fight things if you're locked to 2 range. That's true that it is a significant constraint, but I would rather be bow locked than melee locked.
Yeah.
In this of Conquest. Even if just for enemy phase purposes, I would rather be able to counterattack at 2 range than only be able to counterattack at 1 range.
Yeah, I can kind of see it, but it also like it just feels bad either way. Like, but when I think of like annoying when you think of like late game annoying enemies that are like hard to kill, I'm thinking like either sorcerers that you probably 1-round kill, but they do so much damage that if you're not Kaze, it's going to be a bit of a struggle. I'm thinking of like the weird enemy only 1-range weapons like the Shrine Maidens with the 1-range bows and stuff in the Fuga chapter, or Great Masters with like a Bolt Naginata, stuff like that.
Luckily, those are, I think, with maybe one exception, those are all stationary. So
yeah, the priestesses
I think the
definitely
only
are.
exception might be Setsuna in chapter 11, actually.
Yeah,
That might be right.
the point is more
But
that
anyway,
I'm like
yeah,
I'd rather have like I don't know. It's really hard to find people who actually do 1-2 range well in Fates, and they're probably all in S tier right now. And then there's some people that need help, like Kaze and Elise, that can kind of do it. So this is not me saying Effie not good. It's more like saying it's a problem if you don't counter at 1 range or at 2 range more than anything, I guess.
yeah, the fact is, if you want to be a great combat unit, you basically have to be able to use daggers or tomes,
or
Siegfried, or the magic weapons.
Yeah, I guess maybe I overemphasized a bit too much that it was a bow that locked you to it. Because when you think about it, if you're in Great Knight, you're kind of locked to 1 range anyway, for the most part. Because the 2 range options you have are way more limited.
Yeah. Javelin can do things in chapter 17. It's another, like, Effie's one of the people who can reach the one-shot kill threshold there. But beyond that, like, what are you doing with it, really? It's just basically just chipping things on enemy phase, and that's fine, but there's better things to do.
Yeah, and it's really debilitating in Fates if you don't one-shot things. If you go from 1 rounding to 2 rounding, it's always bad in Fire Emblem, but in Fates it feels especially bad because of like seal skills and ninja debuffs. Well, ninja debuffs happen anyway, but seal skills especially. And Effie can miss with a javelin too to make that happen, even if she does 1 shot.
Yeah, certainly. So I think on the merits of what she does with like early combat, and then basically falling off in the Night Tree later on, I would rank Effie pretty low. But I do want to discuss how the archer option works. I think you're right broadly about where Kenshi Knights stand in this game and everything. I don't think they're close to being the premier combat units. But what I do think is cool about going down that path is if you really commit to it. So like you go for Archer Mozu and Archer Effie and build up in like a huge separate air force. You got like Camilla and Wyvern Corrin.
Yeah, which is not out of the way for any of these units anyway. Like it's what they would do.
Yeah. Wyvern Xander, Wyvern Silas, whatever. Falcon Silas, potentially.
If you're not going into Hinoka chapter with like 10 sets of wings in your deployment screen, like what are you doing, right? Sometimes.
It's like deploying a giant air force and just trying to kill everything on player phase is a perfectly viable way to play and very, very safe, especially because you can just see all the combat forecasts on your own turn. You don't have to do calculations about it, really.
That's the main thing for foot units, especially in that chapter. It's so annoying.
Yeah. So it's like, on some level, it feels great to have some really nice flying units. And I think Effie and Mozu later have a niche in that respect because they do have bow access. They can get the sniper skills, so they can become super, super accurate, which helps taking down not necessarily other flying enemies. They're not really that much of a problem. There are a few that have air superiority, but you can just kill them. You can figure it out. But just in general, like having a couple of Kenshi Knights mixed in your entire Air Force can give them some nice matchups. It makes it really easy to handle just about any kind of enemy formation that you might run into. It's a lot of fun. I think it's cool.
I mean, the fact that
probably...
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna say the fact that enemies in Fates or especially in Conquest are usually in groups that move together but otherwise don't move, like they turtle you a little bit. If you have like a giant group of flyers and you just have them all flying at once to kill the biggest threats, and if you have to leave something alive, you can leave alive the least threatening enemy. That's probably a pretty big boon that I have overlooked in Kenshi Knight. That seems really good to me.
Yeah. So it's a way to play. I think it works well. It feels good. It's just not like objectively the most efficient way to approach the game, because you can just use absolute gods who have 1-2 range and more or less infinite survivability to clear most of the enemies anyway. So like, if someone asked me like, hey, would you recommend like taking Effie through the Archer tree and doing what she can do with that? I'd say yes, absolutely. It feels great. There's some cool things she can do. She makes a really great bow user in chapter 17. There's lots of nice stuff for Kenshi Knights to do in chapter 20. In the Hinoka chapter, it's tons of fun, feels awesome, works well. But even still, it's not nearly as good as the top combat units. So I think what I would in Archer really is like her only option, because Mozu or Effie's friendship options are Archer from Mozu and Dark Mage from Nyx, and I think that's it. I don't think I'm forgetting anyone.
Her friend is food.
She's awful. She's awful at Dark Mage, by the way. Don't do it. And as far as marriage options go, basically the best she can do is Silas, just to get those free Cavalier skills. She would love to have Wyvern access, but there are no first-gen men who give Wyvern. She can get Berserker relatively easily, and that's another cool... It's kind of cool. It really maximizes Puissance because you get ridiculous strength, so you can outclass like anything. It is possible, along the same lines as using the Archer Kenshi Knight flyer spam strategy, it is possible to just dominate groups of enemies with a pack of Berserkers who all hit ridiculously hard. But that's like a tier below the Kenshi Knight spam.
I'm assuming, by the way, that, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you reclass Effie out of Knight, she's actually not that durable, right? Like, she's kind of frail.
Yeah, she's not. Her defense base and growth are not that good. She has really great strength and pretty good speed growth, which isn't really helped by Knight at all, but her defenses are not that strong. She does get to keep defense +2 and natural cover, so that's something. Like, she's not going to become frail, but she's not going to be anywhere near as bulky as she was when she stuck to Knight.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. I was like, wait, what happened to my Effie? It reminds me of the DS games where if you reclass one of the armor knights, they also become like class cannons because the way that their personal bases stack up to the class bases, suddenly they're no longer looking good.
Yeah, that seems to be like the eternal problem of armored knights in games with reclassing, is they're always tuned stat-wise so that they're not too dominant with their physical bulk. So it works well with knight bases and growths, but if you take them out of that, usually you find that their HP and their defense stats are a little bit undertuned, and that's basically true for Effie.
It does make Effie a lot more interesting as a unit, though, because you can choose between being really tanky or being like super, super powerful and potentially a bit faster. Well, a lot faster than she would normally be. So it's not a bad thing. It's just something to be wary of when you reclass into Kenshi Knight. You expect the enemy face an enemy and she just dies. So where does that leave her then? Because it's the way you talked about her and the way I felt about her makes her feel like another B tier to me.
Yeah, that's what I would tend towards as well. Like, she's definitely a step up from a handful of other units that I think take a lot more work to get going, and are sort of more fixed in what they can do. But yeah, I would probably stick her in the lower end of B tier.
I was thinking about her versus Arthur because they both get a lot of value for their early game addition, and in a way they're both hard to leave out of early game because Arthur provides the only like offensive pair-up support that's like really, really good, whereas Effie, I guess she's not the only tank you have in the early game. You have Korn and you have Silas, so I guess she's a bit less essential. And they both and both in the mid game, both Arthur's support is no longer as unique as Effie's qualities are. So I was looking for some parallels, seeing which is better. But I see what you're saying too, because Arthur feels a bit more essential with his pair up, and also
I think I'd be a lot more likely, unless I was going out of my way to do something in particular, I'd be a lot more likely to want to keep Arthur deployed deeper into the game than Effie.
That's fair. I'm okay with that. I'll throw her here then. Is there anything else on Effie that we need to go over?
Don't think so.
It's okay.
Seemed
If
like
there's
we're
anything
good.
that comes to mind later, we can have like a little bonus round where you can add like little things that we forgot.
Yeah, and I'm sure eventually we'll get comments on these videos and we'll want to address some of those, or
Probably,
not.
possibly, maybe if we have
have to
time
defend
left at
myself
some
a few
point.
times. Yeah,
I don't know. I think in
it
Conquest,
might just be me answering in the comments. But
yeah,
we'll see.
that's also fine if you want to do that instead. I'm not going to stop you. I will also say that like in a game where you can make almost anyone work, you could probably also argue almost any unit tier list. You probably wouldn't put Camilla over Arthur, but other than that, you could make almost any argument work. I feel like. So,
Yeah, and that's what we kind of went into at the beginning of this whole exercise. Is fundamentally when you do a tier list on this, unless you have some like very specific metrics, you kind of have to do everything on vibes, and you can sort of tell who's better than who, but you know, and for a lot of it, it comes down to your values and how you like to play, and I'm trying to be sort of generalist about how I rank these things because I know some things about LTC and expected turn count runs. They're not my bag. I don't really focus on that kind of stuff.
Same.
And I had an interesting conversation a while back where I discussed how, like, for a lot of these tier lists, I think the usual premise is, well, you focus on low turn count or something close to it, like whatever efficiency means, because that's what really brings out the differences between units. But in this game, because if you really try, you can make most units do most roles. If your criterion is just, I want to optimize everything perfectly and distribute my resources correctly to make things work, I mean, you can do just about anything. So it kind of collapses the differences between units if you just consider like the tightest possible criteria, which is strange.
Yeah, I think what we've been doing is way more interesting anyway than just focusing on turn counts and expected turn counts or anything like that. Like, we're just going over strategies that you can do in certain parts of the game that work really well, and either they turn a unit into a juggernaut, or they hit some specific funny numbers, or they get some one round somewhere that other units cannot do. I feel like those are also more interesting strategies to listen to and try out for yourself. So that's why I'm really happy with the discussion so far. I've got a lot of things that I want to try now.
Yeah, and for next time, I think Leo and Odin will be particularly interesting fodder for that kind of thing, because there's a lot to say about them, and they're pretty interesting to think about.
I'm looking forward to it. Well, thanks for being on again, Soren, and everyone, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.